Ooh, that's nice. Ooh. You ready?
Whoa. I have to go to my deep voice to match you.
That's very naughty. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to this very special, nay, spectacular, I know it doesn't seem spectacular, it's in a backyard, but it is spectacular vlog 233. This is Docfest 2020. Q&A. Now, this tradition was started last year with our first Docfest, where wonderful people on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn would contact me and give me questions, and I'd try and have a go at answering them. This was a great moment because I have a go at answering them, but great feedback returns from my answers, and a whole series of vlogs emerges from what I've done right or wrong during this session. And last year, for our first Docfest, the question and answer session was led by the Queen, that is Lisa Warren. Dear friend of ours, we love you, Lisa, and Lisa did an absolutely tremendous job. No pressure, Jamie, but the nature of COVID and the very notion of social distancing means that for an event such as this, one has to be married to a person to be doing something this close. And I love Lisa like life itself, but I'm not married to her, but here's one I prepared earlier. So look, Jamie, these questions are so complicated this year. They're brilliant, but they're so complicated that I'm sort of glad I've got your assistance and support as well. And Lisa was great with me last year too. So look, if you're happy, can you ask the questions and explain to me where I'm going wrong when I do? But let's in many ways launch Docfest, because this vlog will appear just at the start of Docfest, and explain, and it really is a symbol, I think too, Jamie, that this is a symbol of, that this is about students, for students, and we have digital and analogue interfaces configured for you. Yes, you. So welcome to our backyard once more. Who knew 2020 would be like this? I had such high hopes. Did you have high hopes?
For 2020, absolutely.
Yes, it's been other, hasn't it, darling? So Jamie Quinton, you're in charge. Jamie Quinton, Professor of Physics, Professor of Nanotech, everything, so many things, magnificent things, and you're now in charge. So go for it. This, can I say, this coffee is outstanding. Can I just put that out there? This is blowing my head off.
So hi everyone. Can I assume that we're going to answer some of these burning questions people have, and hope that it might even continue conversation through online, through comments and so forth?
Oh, look, I do, Jamie, because these questions, as always happens with the students, I wouldn't have had, and I'll be honest, thank you for asking that question, I wouldn't have had the courage to ask some of these questions. I certainly wouldn't have thought of them. So I've had a bit of a think, and I'll have a go, but I'll get your feedback, and I'll have another go in a more expansive vlog if I can. But let's try, mate.
So that just covers off on the idea that the questions and answers might spur more questions.
Oh, I think they will. I think they will.
Okay. Well, our first question comes from Tamara. Hi, Tamara. And the question for you is, what advice would you give international PhD students who are about to begin their program abroad? Abroad,
right. So international PhD students, and obviously with COVID, we can't pretend that's not occurring. Mobility is truncated, mobility is challenged. But let's assume for the moment, noting that the digital doctorate is a thing, who knew it was a thing, and students can be in a home country and now complete a PhD without moving. So let's firstly assume that's not a digital doctorate, that with Tamara, she is wanting to move nations and is about to. So international students, depending on the university, vary from 5% of the PhD cohort for the smaller, perhaps regional universities, through to 30%, and even I know a university in the United Kingdom with 40% of their PhD students as international students. You very rarely heard me use the phrase international students. And I don't use that phrase for a reason. Because a student is a student is a student is a student, and we're all diverse and complicated. And for example, at Flinders University, Our international students come from 52 separate countries. So if I was going, they're about 11% of our student group, by the way, and if I was to generalise about all those countries and all those students, then I would stop listening. So the first thing I need to say is the notion that international students require a Fordist strategy to manage a new environment, that's nonsense, right? So you are an individual, you are coming to a university, we love you, we respect you for who you are as that individual, as that scholar. So that's the first thing. But let's just start with the social stuff, Jamie. So you've lived in a different country. I've bounced around the world like a yo-yo, and yes, I have returned back to Australia, but it is incredibly challenging. Incredibly challenging to move countries, and what it means, and I know this more than most people, is you arrive in a country and you don't know how the transportation system works, you don't know how to buy groceries, you don't know how to organise a water supply or a power supply. You just can't get around all the things you knew in your previous system. You don't know. So what I recommend is, firstly, start to personally and spatially orient yourself. So reach out to what in every university is called an international centre or an international unit or an international organisation that is the, what would you say, the clearinghouse, if you will, the space where international matters are the focus. So reach out to those groups of professionals and ask them about transportation, housing, get all their packages of materials and sit with them. That's incredibly important. And
while this might be the first time for you, it's not the first time for the International Centre or the people who are at the university there to provide that support.
I think that's crucial. Yeah. So use their, and they have packages and people, and they'll meet you off the plane and all sorts of fabulous things. So firstly, reach out to that group. But secondly, because we are dealing with PhD students, reach out to your supervisor. Yeah. And I'll tell you why. Because your supervisor, whether in the sciences or the high humanities, has a group of students. And so make sure the relationship with the supervisor is sound, get to know them. Before you arrive, have weekly Skype meetings if you can, and that'll just ease the transition in. But also ask your supervisor to introduce you to other PhD students in the program. Your best friends will come from that group, and so they will help you orient into your new environment. So that's the personal, the professional thing, but also don't be hard on yourself. The great statistics I can give you is international students are profoundly successful. They are the fastest completers in a PhD. They have the most incredible awards. So I think about, for example, with our Excellence Award at Flinders University, invariably a larger group of those Excellence Awards for best theses in the university are given to international students beyond their proportion. So the first thing is you have an arc and a trajectory for success, but in many ways you have to create the frame personally, professionally and intellectually so you're okay. But the other thing I would say is it's also fine to not be okay, right? And to ask for help. And that's the crucial thing I see in an Office of Graduate Research. So make sure you meet your dean. You sit down with the dean, you get to know the professional staff, the administrative staff. They can help you. Ask the question. Don't ever sit and suffer. Don't. Please don't. There are hundreds of people who are interested in you, who care for you and want to see you succeed. Now, the issue is the nature of colonisation, the nature of internationalisation, the nature of globalisation. Is all of us don't know what we don't know. So we can provide the parameters and the structures and the policies and the procedures to help you, but we don't know what we don't know. So make sure always when something gets a bit weird, do ask. Ask me. I'm sure you've all got deans out there. Send an email to the dean. I get hundreds a day. I love hearing from you. One message from you I can answer in 5 minutes and might stop you worrying for a week. So do that.
Absolutely true.
So do that. So basically it's just get yourself personal, but give yourself a break too. You're doing fantastically. Living in a different country is the most amazing thing you will ever do. It made me, it built me as a human. So you are a different person when you finish this international experience, and it's a great experience. It takes courage and grit and endurance and persistence, but if you can do it, triumph awaits you. How's that for an answer? Good on you, Tony.
Can I just add one?
I would love that.
I'm just going to butt in.
Oh, what you do?
From a supervisor's point of view, most of the supervisors that you'll encounter have actually been overseas. They've definitely been overseas, I would say, but most of them have actually lived overseas at some point during their lives, so they know what it's like, and they don't expect you to just arrive and fit right in and be ready to go. They actually have some appreciation of the fact that we know how hard it is anyway. It's hard for every student to settle in and transition into the PhD or the higher degree. But we know that you need to establish your base needs, and we know that you're not likely to be able to figure it all out by yourself. So never treat it like you're by yourself and isolated and you need to figure out everything.
And can I just add one other final thing too? That's superb. I'm just remembering yesterday we ran our online induction, and the lovely Angelina, hello, Selamat Pagi, Angelina, was asking these questions, going, how am I going? Am I all right? How do I find out this? So she was asking that during an orientation, but she was present at the orientation. So all those sorts of orientations, inductions, meet and greets, go to them, meet people, transform your life.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, our next question is from Brabazon.
Hello, Brabazon.
And the question is, how can non-native speakers of English improve their academic writing?
Oh yes, now here we go. This is what I often refer to as the Joseph Conrad matter, and I'll try and explain that shortly. Heart of Darkness, for those of you that know where I'm going. So, Brabazon, thank you so much for that. The first thing I need to say to you is the best students I have graduated as a PhD supervisor have been international students with English as a second or third language. So the first thing is recognise you might think you're not a good writer. My experience proves otherwise. Okay, so the first thing is assess what your worry is and ask professionals, ask your supervisor, ask colleagues, and ascertain if your assumption about yourself and your writing is actually real or accurate, or it's something else. So that's the first thing. The second thing is be confident. Remember, you are a PhD student. Now, student, you're learning, right? When people go PhD researcher and stuff, I often correct them because we are dealing with students and you are learning and you have permission to learn. You have a right to learn, you have a responsibility to learn. And one of those things that you learn is, you've guessed it, writing. And so therefore what I would advise, if you are an English as a second language speaker, so new permanent resident for example, or an international student, pick out a university that cares about writing. And what are you looking for? Well, you're looking for, in an office of graduate research or an office of centre or unit, whatever your university calls it, a lot of our universities have writing programs as part of our professional development. So it's integrated into the entire story. So it's not a matter of, oh, I'm English as a second language, oh no, I'm a problem, I'm over there in the naughty corner. It's like, look for mainstreamed writing programs for everybody that are part of the story. And some universities have that, some don't. Make your selection on the basis of these writing programs, professional development programs, if this is a worry for you. So for example, let's just go through what's available at Flinders. Every Friday morning there is a writing group called The Right Bunch with the Dean. Hello to all the right bunches out there. We all get together, we write together for 30 minutes every single week and then talk about what we've been writing in the half an hour after. Every single week there is a writing organisation 2 hours. So people get together and talk about writing and structuring. So that group gets together and they move their way through.
But it's always in context, isn't it? So it's not like it's an extra task for people. They actually are working on the mainstream things that they'd be working on anyway.
So let me give you an example. Thank you for that. So let me give you an example. As the organisational structuring writing group that meet, I think, on Thursday mornings, they come with the chapter or the chapter that they're writing for their supervisors, or a chapter that they're thinking of writing, and they have the headings and the structure, and the group talk through the structuring of the idea. So yeah, it's not like let's randomly do it.
It's not extra work. It's actually to help you do the work you need to do.
Oh, absolutely. It's not like let's write an essay on goldfish. Let's invent something. Let's goldfish is a thing. Respect. But it is very much you bring the work, or what's your problem, and that is managed in that group. And so there's all these different specific groups, including in the case of Flinders, a one-on-one writing tutoring. So what happens? The student may be going through some challenges, and they come to meet an experienced writer with a PhD, so they write for a living, but they've also done a PhD, so they know it, and they sit with you, and by the way, all these services are free, can I say? They sit with you at least once a week, you get that hour one-on-one free, and they sit with you and teach you the writing skills. So they show you what's going right and wrong, but they teach you how to fix it. Right? So what I would advise is everything, if writing is your worry, pick a university where writing is their thing. And it's not a matter if it's a secondary thing or, just get the results and you're fine. Don't go for those sort of universities. I mean, Jamie is one of the greatest writers I've ever seen. He's a physicist, magnificent writer. My boss, Robert Saint.
I'm not supposed to be able to write.
But you're magnificent writer. My boss, Robert Saint, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, one of the greatest writers I've ever seen, right? So don't do the art science thing, because that's nonsense. But if you are worried about writing, ask the questions going into the university whether or not the infrastructure or the scaffolding is available to support you. And I'll just finish off with the Joseph Conrad point that started me off. Joseph Conrad, I think English was his third language, and he wrote Heart of Darkness. Apocalypse Now. Fantastic book. Now, when you read that book, and it's one of my favourite books in the top 10, when you read that book, it reads a bit odd. It's disturbing. It's different. It's managing English differently. But those differences make the book. So the innovation, the reflection that you bring to the English language from having the profound expertise of working in other languages, that's a gift. That's a gift. And that will allow you to not only write great English, but write it differently and defiantly and with courage, and creating a distinctive writing style. So it's a gift. Is that
yeah.
Is that the answer?
I'm just wondering, a follow-up question. My right as the questioner.
Knock yourself out, brother.
I'm wondering if, Tari, your comment about the success rate for international students is actually related to their uptake of PD compared to domestic students. Do you find that international students are well engaged with PD?
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Yes, they are. And a big hi to Dr. Danny Milos, who's in charge of our professional development program. Yes, they are. And I've got the data sets. I'm going through the data sets in my head at the moment. Yes, that is the case. So international students, and also when they come, they commit. So the programs I've talked about, anyone can go to an hour gig on something, and they're always well subscribed, international students and our domestics. But our international students particularly dig in. So every week, so when we've got programs for a year, they come every single week. They commit, they dig in, and they're successful. So of course that's why they finish in the minimum time, because they're not mucking about.
Yeah.
They're here to learn and to open themselves to new knowledge.
Isn't it interesting that the recognition of I would like to improve, I would like to be better at this, is in fact a precursor to success?
Look, absolutely, and I think, Jamie Dalman, that's the point. When our international students come to us, like in the orientations and inductions, and they're underconfident, I just sort of have to say to them, you are aware that the most successful students on our campus are international students. the students that do the best, that do well, that commit, that are a pleasure to supervise, that are involved in the life, the intellectual life of a university, that is you.
All right, next question.
Yes.
Okay, so this question is from Rach. Hi, Rach.
Hi, Rach.
Rach is asking for a friend. Hi, Rach.
Oh, no,
friend.
she is actually asking for a friend. I don't know the friend's name.
It's okay. It's okay.
It is actually a real friend rather than a.
That's okay. Anyway, the question is, and this is a very in-depth question.
Oh, it's this one. Oh my goodness.
How do you reconcile Indigenous methodologies with the standard colonial methodologies that are accepted and promoted, often by white Australians who are PhD supervisors?
Right, so when I was thinking about these questions this morning at the gym, Dylan, this was the one that I got myself riled up about. So I need to just try and approach this rationally.
Yep.
Okay, because I've had to go in my head, I talk to myself a lot, I've had to go about 8 times and I've ended up sort of like hurting myself at the end of it. So let me just try and express this as I feel. Right, so firstly, Indigenous methodologies, yes, please notice the plural. So the notion of we have, and I'll call them colonizer methodologies and Indigenous methodologies, and that's basically othering Indigenous methodologies, right? So the first thing we need to say is Indigenous methodologies are plural and complex, multi-interdisciplinary, post-disciplinary, and when properly engaged with and explored, transform, transcend, challenge, alter, in some ways decimate colonising methodologies, okay? The reason they haven't so far is because our universities, particularly in Australia, are profoundly colonising organisations. So firstly, Rach and Rach's friend, hi. Indigenous methodologies need to be taught to every single person, every single supervisor, every single student, no matter what the discipline. So, co-design, Indigenous co-design can exist in physics as much as it can exist in filmmaking, right? So we've got to actually take that on board. Now let's get into this. So that's obvious, but I think our attention has been on methodologies. Or if we can just get the methodologies right, everything else will be fine. And it's like no, and this is where I just got to just calm the farm a bit. So Australian universities, and we can talk about Aotearoa New Zealand, we can talk about Canada, we can talk about any nation you like, but we are nowhere near post-coloniality. We are in a deeply colonising, destructive space and place. And universities are part of that colonisation, okay? We are implicated, we are into this thing up to our necks, right? Because what we validate as language, what we validate as methodology, as knowledge, as examination processes, as what's required to be admitted into a PhD, every single step of it is a colonising moment, right? So what we need to do, and I've been working on decolonising the doctorate for 20 years, and I've failed. I'm still failing, but I'm hopefully putting on a good fight. And
I guess that. I'm sorry, I'm butting in.
No, please.
I'm guessing that's because the requirements, the frame, the lens in which the PhD is kind of structured and measured is in fact through a colonial lens.
Correct. That's exactly right. So if we're going spot on. So if we're going to address that, there are hundreds of things we have to do. The first thing that we have to do as white people, we can go white privilege or not, I'm comfortable, I've got challenges with the term, but I'm absolutely cool with it. You present this skin to the world, you have an easy ride. Thanks. The first thing that white supervisors, white academics have to do is shut the hell up often. Be quiet, be respectful, and listen. Excuse me, I'm having a cough. So we've got to be respectful, we've got to listen. Then the next step is you've got to do something. And what white people can do, particularly in positions of power in universities, is we can hire Indigenous academics. So the first thing we have to do is increase the proportion of Indigenous scholars in our universities. And there's lots of ways we can do that. One great scheme I was involved in was hiring a B-level academic, and 80% of that colleague's time was spent doing a PhD. So they were teaching in 20% of their time, but they were supported to do the PhD, and they'd finished in 3 years. So we had a magnificent scholar, Indigenous scholar, with a PhD in 3 years, and they've gone, I think they're now an associate professor, right? So firstly, we need to increase the number of Indigenous colleagues. Secondly, then we need to promote them, and we need to listen to them. And then once we've got that group, every single policy or procedure in the entirety of the university needs to be recalibrated and reinvestigated. Because if we're enacting a decolonising lens, then that is a root and branch transformation of what we do. This is everything to me, but can I say, so that's the big project. The challenge we've got now, Jamie Dallin, as we know, is that white people are supervising Indigenous students. I supervised 2 Indigenous colleagues to completion in the last 18 months. I have a remarkable Indigenous student now, and what I know, and I've supervised them throughout my career, incredible, is I have learnt much more than I've ever taught, and it is a privilege. I can't even put this into language. It is a privilege to supervise an Indigenous scholar. And of course, because of the colonising structures, they have a higher attrition rate, long candidatures. I think they're running about 2% of our students in Australia are Indigenous colleagues in doctoral programs. That's a disgrace. That's a disgrace. So
even though this question that Rachel's asked for her friend is about methodologies, is it actually more a question of epistemological differences and different expectations? Because I mean, there is an epistemological what a word
it is
foundation to the PhD. The PhD, what outcomes we actually are looking for in a doctoral program. They are steeped in epistemology. So
epistemology is everything. See, that's what I'm sort of saying. It's like, what is knowledge? And at the moment, if white people do it, it's knowledge. If black crew do it, it's not really in a PhD program. It's nice, but that's culture. It's not knowledge. And I'm sorry. So it really starts with epistemology. There's the root and branch work. But
it's interesting though, because when I'm examining a PhD thesis, I'm actually interested in the journey, the development of the knowledge, or the knowledge journey, as opposed to the actual knowledge gained at the end. And I think perhaps that's maybe where that reconciliation can come from.
Look, I think it can.
But that's just my personal take on that.
See, I think we're a long way away from any mode of reconciliation. I think we need to create space for difference, space for Indigenous epistemologies to emerge, and where I'll finish this so I don't just lose the will to live, is where what it's about is white people, colonisers, respecting the Indigenous scholars that we have the gift to supervise, and know that gift, understand the context and complexity of it, and enable their journey. And the journey of each of those remarkable Indigenous students will transform the country and hundreds, nay thousands of lives. And this is not an arts versus science thing. This is Indigenous scientists, which I know is a big political commitment for you. It's throughout the entirety of the academy. And this will change universities if we do it properly. It's a lifelong project, but it starts with white supervisors behaving properly, respecting ontologies and epistemologies.
At least there are, and even though I agree with you, there's a long way to go. I'm pleased to say, at least in science, there is a national network of science Indigenous scholars that the Council of Deans of Science are working on, and as a result of that, and a lot of the universities, including Flinders, are trying to create a network of Indigenous scholars in science in particular. But I think it should be, encouraged across all disciplines.
I agree. And final thing, you can see I'm really worked up about this. The final thing I'd say to you is we don't look about us and go, oh, only 2% of PhD students are Indigenous colleagues. You don't start with that. You start in primary school. You start in primary school. I used to be Professor of Education, head of a school of teacher education in the bush, in a regional university. And my passion, my life, was making sure that in these regional communities there was an outstanding maths teacher. There was an outstanding science teacher, right? Because in country areas, the teachers, they call it churning. So a teacher comes in and leaves in a year or 18 months. And the higher percentage of Indigenous students in a classroom, the greater the churn. So people go, oh, look, why have we not got any Indigenous first-year students?
Yeah.
Start with teacher education. Start with early childhood education, and and this is a generational transformation.
It is, yeah.
And it starts with respect and decency, as you've said, of epistemological respect.
Wow. That was an amazing question, Rach.
Good on you, Rach.
Now the next question is from Rach. Hi, Rach.
Yeah, no, it is the same Rach too.
And I kind of half joked about for a friend because I thought this is a clever way in which you can ask two questions.
I love that.
So this question from Rach is: does the thesis stand alone, or can an examiner challenge it if there have been few or no publications from it during its completion? I like this question.
Woo! Okay, so let me just repeat it back so we're all very clear. So we've got a thesis, and in that thesis are some publications. Now that's very, very common. That's mostly, I think mostly it's what happens. Probably 80 or 90% of theses, a lot higher percentage in the sciences, have publications in them. So this is pretty well the norm. So Rach is saying, right, okay, so we've got this thesis, it's got some pubs in it. Cruise this through. And then, of course, what happens is the examiner, and you go, well, how can that be? How can that be? We see that a lot in the Office of Graduate Research. Natalie Hills, the head of examinations, this is our special topic. We get together and discuss this. So, firstly, the crucial point I need to make is that refereeing and examination are different things.
This is true.
Full stop. Now, that could be the answer to the question, but I will actually continue. So, refereeing is, particularly in the sciences, where there are very clear generic parameters about what an article looks like. So, okay, here is data set, here is a way of structuring ideas for that journal. Referees look at it and go, yep, that's fine, that looks pretty right, thanks for playing. It's gone through refereeing and it's published. Now, refereeing is not perfect. If it was, you wouldn't have retraction watch. And we all know, don't we, that refereeing can be uneven. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Refereeing can be uneven, so what I talked about a few vlogs ago about the Chianti read, that happens with theses. It also happens through refereeing. Yes, and articles look a lot better 3 Chiantis in, I believe. Yeah. So look, refereeing is uneven. It's an inelegant art. All sorts of biases come in. Do I believe in refereeing? Like life is long. I believe in refereeing. I believe in peer review. But a lot of errors and sloppiness, is made. We know that. And also, refereeing is different from examination. So, firstly, lots of stuff goes wrong with, errors get through in publications. Then we get to the thesis itself. Now, a PhD has policies, procedures, guidelines that go to examiners about what they're looking for. And one thing they're not looking for is a refereed article. They're looking for an original contribution to knowledge, an arc of an argument, very good academic scaffolding, good structure between chapters, the building of the narrative, as Jamie said so brilliantly, and they want to see the vista. They want to see the arc of knowledge being created. Now, what sadly happens with, I would argue, bad supervision, or I've called it, is we've got particular supervisors who have decided, oh look, you've got three articles, that's a thesis, whack it in chapter 4, 5 and 6, thanks, write a bit of a literature review, intro, outro, thanks for playing, bang. Now maybe those theses got through, not in my experience, and I've been involved in graduate education now pretty closely for over 20 years. I would argue they've never got through. Maybe they did in some unicorn nirvana. But what we do see actually, and this is the tragedy of it, where there are publications, they are badly placed in the thesis. So it's like the thesis is going well, and then it's like, and there's like, let's just slam this article in, has nothing to do with the stuff around it. And then, oh, hello, here's the next chapter. It's like, right, and so the methodology is the same. It's pretty well cut and paste. So it's like there's a repetition, and you're going, really? And then there's a conclusion. So people who are wanting to read a thesis go, right, well, there's half a thesis here and a couple of articles. The articles, and examiners say this, the articles don't talk with anything around it. D, revise and resubmit. Right?
Are you reading my mind? Yeah.
So, and we'll get to you in 1 second because you've done this. So, in other words, there's the factual matter, if you will, that you have an article, it's gone through refereeing. If there are errors in it, examiners will pick that up. And I have a great story. It was in forensic science, I think, where a remarkable examiner went through, I think there were 10 publications in it. And he'd spent 40 hours listing the errors in the publications. All of them. So like, the maths was wrong. Okay, so that's the first thing. So errors factually can occur. Then there's actually, you've just destroyed the story of your PhD. So you've said, oh look, it's gone through refereeing, that means it's of quality, the examiner will agree with them, thanks. And actually the examiner is after something else, much more granular, much more meaningful, the arc of the argument. So that's my bit of it. Now, you've seen this recently as an examiner.
Well, yes, I have. So I was actually going to ask the follow-up question, can the examiner challenge it even if it has multiple publications, but you've already answered that.
Oh, yes, that gentleman did. Oh my goodness me, yes.
I'm going to try and throw an idea out there as well.
Yeah.
So I think part of the problem is the student reaches the end of their doctoral candidature and they encounter something called an examination. And because it's called an examination, you see it as a pass or a fail type activity, and that's all you care about. You care about the qualification of, is it good enough, yes or no. But
yeah, like it's binary, that's right.
If you think about what the purpose is, the learning objective of what a doctoral program is, and it's about the development of knowledge, truly great scholars actually welcome criticism. You actually learn more when you have impediments, when people put things to you you haven't thought of and go, did you think about this? Is this another possible interpretation? Or, you know, are you limiting your thinking here? And then you, and in fact, it can spurn entire new research programs and so forth, right? If you're confident enough and comfortable enough with your knowledge and your skills and what you've developed in your PhD, you shouldn't actually be frightened of the examination process, because even if you get pushed back, even if the examiner says, you know, there are flaws here, it can be an academic exercise. You can actually have a conversation, you can make changes, you can recognize the limitations. All of those things are part of showing a deep understanding of the material that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, and the flaw, the problem is the research. The thing that goes wrong is the research. The grit in the oyster creates the pearl.
And I think, absolutely. But I also think that notion of it's got to be perfect or get it right and wrong is a problem, I think.
I'd never thought about that as an issue, whereas I always see it very much as a continuum. And just to finish off Rachel's point, so I hope, Rachel, we've been provocative on this, but Rach, what I'd also say is one of my favourite stories from an oral exam, from a viva, is, and of course he was a Yorkshireman, of course he was, where he was saying, right, well, let's get into this. And it was a great, really robust, fun viva, and the student did really well, can I say. But I always remember the gentleman from Yorkshire say about an hour in, right, so we're at chapter 4, the publication. let me explain to you how I disagree with the peer review. And then it was some of the most fun I've seen in 30 minutes. So he then asked questions about, okay, well, it might have gone through refereeing, but have you thought about this, and this? The peer review didn't, you need to. And by the way, the student passed.
Yeah. Okay, well, the next question actually is a continuation of this.
It is.
So Claudia, hi Claudia, asks, how does publication around your thesis work? How does it work? Can you publish chapters or papers but not exactly like your thesis?
Oh, there it is. So Claudia, I am waiting for Claudia to enrol. Claudia will do the fastest PhD in the history of the universe. She has been planning to do a PhD. How long, Claude? 5 years? It's just, Claudia, enrol. Claudia, change the world. Please, Claudia, enrol in a PhD now. But this question might help her do so. So, as I've said, it's great. I'm never one of those people that says, oh, don't publish from a PhD. I think people misconstrue my statements about refereeing and examination. I've published how many? 250 refereed articles, most of them single-authored, about to finish my 20th book, and some people go, oh, she doesn't like publications. Dude. But I have 250 refereed articles, I have one PhD. And from that PhD, I got 13 articles from them, right, from that PhD. But Claudia, what I'd say to you is, I think people in our contemporary age do stuff backwards. I know that doesn't come to as a surprise to you and I, Claudia, but people say, oh, well, I have a publication. I've never understood this, so maybe you can explain to me. I have a publication, and then I'll put it in the thesis. Whereas the clearly logical thing to do is write the thesis first. So write the chapter as a chapter, cool, living the dream, nice arc, everything smoothly works together, beautiful. And then what happens is, it takes, 1 day to change a thesis chapter into an article. Right, so I'm always in wonderment that people don't write the chapter and then go, righto, publication, because it takes a day. And further, if you've written the big, chunky, fabulous chapter, as we found with beautiful Narelle, hi Narelle, when you've got the big chapters, they become 3 articles. So you can then go, oh, right, well, that's beautiful. And then the sections in the chapter become independent articles. So instead of getting 3, 4, or 5 articles out of a PhD, you get 10, 11, 12. So how am I going around her question? So what I would do, Claudia, always is focus on the thesis first. Get the thesis right, my love. And then that can lead into a scholarly monograph, for in your work, in your area, my love. 1 day, you change, there's your thesis, change thesis to book, find, replace, in, out, shake it all about, there's a book, right? And same thing with the chapters and the articles. This is, once you've got the thesis, it's very fast to mine the articles out of it. Where it gets challenging is, here's the journal, you've written that data set up for that particular journal in that particular way, and then you've got to, I'll use the phrase reverse engineer it to work in a thesis. So that's my first go. Do you want to go?
I'm going to give you the counter argument.
Please
do.
So
in the technical sciences, we tend to do the opposite. We tend to publish first and then write the thesis. And there's a couple of reasons
and they're
for
good reasons.
that.
They're good reasons.
Yeah, so the first reason is when the student is working out what that arc is, when they publish their work, they actually get feedback from a reviewer.
Correct.
Who gives them an independent assessment of their thinking, of their data, of how well they're progressing.
Great use of peer review. Great.
And so exactly. So when they go to write their thesis, they're more confident that their thesis is going to be successful because it's already been through that peer review process. That's where, for the purpose of the thesis, that's actually of value. The second reason is because when a student in the technical sciences tends to finish their thesis, they've usually got the thing that they're going to do next lined up and they go to jump into it. And if they haven't published by that point, they're much, much less likely to publish after the fact, no matter how great their thesis is.
Great point.
So in my case, I actually was really lucky. I worked really hard and I got 9 papers out of my PhD. But I did those. I had 7 of those when I submitted my thesis, and I had 2 that I wrote after it was submitted.
Beautiful.
So that, I think, in whatever the circumstances were at that time, I managed to get it right.
Oh, look, I agree, and I don't think we necessarily disagree. My feeling is that, and I'm a big believer in publishing on the way through too, Giles. I don't think it's like at the end. Some disciplines you sort of have to because you don't know enough. I think some of the humanities,
that's actually a great point, right? So when you get that feedback, it's really a qualification of, do you know enough?
That's exactly right. So publish on the way through, but do make sure that the priority is on the thesis. So get that article out, punch it out, get the data set checked, get the verification of methods checked, that's crucial. But then don't just crunch it back into the thesis, cut and paste it.
No.
Certainly cut and paste it, but then I want that in the thesis, smooth, clear and beautiful. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I'd add one more thing.
Please.
The smartest advice I think I could impart after everything we've just talked about is write as you go.
Everything.
Absolutely.
Everything. Day one.
Every PhD graduate
Day one. Right.
I've encountered has said, I wish I wrote more as I went than I have.
Absolute crap. Read and write all the way through. And therefore, Claudia, certainly do publish on the way through. I think you've heard the two lines of argument there. I don't think there's much dissonance there at all, actually. Publish on the way through, but the priority is always the thesis. You are publishing for the thesis and the imperative of the thesis on the way through.
There is a part of Claudia's question we didn't talk about, which is not exactly like your thesis. So, the content in a paper is not the same as the content in your thesis, because you'll have detail in your thesis that you wouldn't necessarily have in a paper. A paper has a more limited scope
and genre
than a chapter in a thesis, for instance.
And is often much shorter in the sciences too.
Yeah. So I'm giving you from a science perspective, but I can imagine that's probably more generalisable.
But can I also make the other point too, and I've often heard colleagues in the harder end of the social sciences say, oh look, there's an article, you just slam it in, and the rest of it is, they often use words like guff. Is the word guff? You know, like it's extra, it's padding, it's not needed. What people don't quite grasp is that, inverted commas, padding is often another article in and of itself. So that's the point about fleshing it out, is yes, that's an article, but the fleshing out, the rendering of it is also meaningful work that can become a publication.
And in my case, the example I just gave you of myself, where there were 7 I submitted and then I wrote 2 more. The 2 more came about because after I submitted, I went back and re-looked at it and saw that there were 2 more opportunities, right? So it's an iterative process. It's not a straight-through process. You can actually go back and revisit it.
And I think
extend.
Claudia, I think that's a great point. Do it like an iterative configuration, but in our sort of disciplines, Claudia, not much publishing happens for us in the first year. Sometimes in the harder end sciences, if you're lucky, something great can happen. In our field, you just don't quite know enough in the first year, but then things build up momentum in the second, and the third year, bang.
And sciences is very much like that too.
Yeah. And if, Claudia, in that second half of the question, you were raising the issue of self-plagiarism, which might have been there a little bit. We've obviously done a vlog on self-plagiarism. I mean, I call it the unicorn. What do I call it? I mean, it's invented. You know, commercial publishing has invented that as a thing. Knock yourself out. But it's another great point to not take an article and just slam it into the thesis, because of course you might have signed away. I mean, because it's then copyright, IP, all these other variables that are involved, and you can't do that, particularly if the thesis is going to be open access. So that's another great example to either take a completed chapter and produce an article cut from it, and then you can cite the article in the chapter, or indeed the other way around. So you've got an article and then you flesh it out properly, and therefore there's no self-plagiarism there, but do cite the journey of the research.
And most publishers, they have their copyright rules available and you can check, but I asked for permission for all of mine because I put them in there in a section in the appendices, but...
yes, great.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So our next question comes from Shay. Hi, Shay.
Hey.
I like this question. So, does imposter syndrome ever go away?
Oh my goodness.
And then Shay says, I finished my PhD and I'm now teaching my own courses at all levels and co-created and teach a popular research methods course for PhD students, but I still feel like a total fraud who will be caught out at any moment.
Oh, wow. So you might have commentary on this. Look, so what I need to talk about here, and this one's a hard one for me, and some of you that have been on the long journey through all these vlogs, I think we did Imposter Syndrome as vlog 3 or something. I mean, I was a different person then. But if you remember that vlog, I started it by saying I'd never heard of this before. Before I came to this job at Flinders University, I had never heard of imposter syndrome, right? And then I did the research on it and went, wow, this is a thing, okay. And then ever since, every gig, including the gig I did, the induction orientation yesterday, someone mentioned imposter syndrome. So this is a thing. It's never been a thing for me. And there are a lot of reasons perhaps why that is the case. And we may just talk about that for a moment. So I am not hugely bothered about what other people may or may not think about me. And when I say not hugely bothered, not bothered at all. So I think imposter syndrome emerges, and the research does show this, if you are invested in what other people think about you. Now in university life, it's like Coronation Street on acid. Everybody's in everybody else's business. And there's a lot of gossip, a lot of chat, a lot of morning teas, a lot of coffees, lots of chat, lots of meetings, lots of chat. And there's a lot of rubbish. 90% of what's being talked about is rubbish, absolute rubbish. And it's all very personal, and the first thing you need to do is slice away that personal commentary. You don't comment about other people's stuff, and they won't comment on you. So the first thing is keep a workplace professional. You've heard me say this. The university is a workplace. It's not a convent. It's not a pub. It's not a brothel. It's a university. It's a workplace. People work there. So get rid of all the gossip and stuff. Zero bothers. So cut that away. And that will calm the discourse a bit, calm the communication system a bit. But then secondly, we've got to think about you. Why are you invested in what other people think of you? And that's the big question, and we've got to, and only you can really address that. And in
Shay's example, I teach a popular research method. So teaching is an interesting way in which this can manifest, right? And you definitely don't know how much you don't know about a subject until you go to teach it. But in fact, in teaching, I think the answer to the question lies in what does teaching mean? Because to be an excellent teacher, you have to be well versed in the literacy behind the thing that you're trying to impart. And there, I think, is the answer to the question. For me, I think the answer to the question is the more you read, the less you'll feel like an imposter. I think that's the short answer to the question.
Do you really?
I do.
So you actually think that it's a matter of you're underconfident because you think in knowledge you're going to be found out?
Yeah, most people when they talk about imposter syndrome put that in the definition of what they mean by it.
Fascinating.
I'm a fake and I'm a phony, it's only a matter of time before someone figures that out.
Whereas actually if you completely reconfigure, because remember I see teaching, I don't even really call it teaching, I call it learning with others. And we teach what we need to learn. So I see teaching as a way of disseminating research. So I don't see teaching as this discrete activity in academic life. So what I'm incredibly interested in is that we're all learners. So the idea that someone would find you out in a classroom, that's a great moment. That's a learning moment. That's great. That's fantastic.
Superficial expectation that a student expects you to know everything about the thing that you're trying to teach because you're the teacher and they're the student.
Whereas actually we're all learners. This is, higher education is not like an episode of The Chaser, right? You're asked a question, you get the question wrong. Life is not a game show. I know it feels like that at times, but it's not. We're all learners. Now, Jamie's point's a good one. If you're not working hard enough, then you know what? Work harder, right? If you're working hard and actually you're good, and by the sounds of Shay, she's a great teacher. She's doing incredibly well. Or Shay. Oh, I was Shay. I apologise, Shay.
It could be a he or a she.
That's exciting. Or non-binary identifying, or everything.
Yep.
Oh, Shay, I'm excited now.
Absolutely.
Shay, you need to get back in touch with us. This is a level of excitement I wasn't quite aware we were going into with this question.
Yep.
That's fantastic. But Shay, what I'd say to you is, why I think I'm comfortable in my level of achievement and why I have zero bothers with what any other human might say about me is because I've probably developed increments of achievement through my academic life, right? So I never put my entire identity on one roll of the dice. Does that make sense? I write lots of articles and some get knocked back and a lot of them get through, and that's tremendous. I teach a lot and some are like fantastic sessions which I've learned a lot and it's been amazing. Some have been okay. And I never put my life on the roll of a dice. And if you think about my quals, you know, I've done what? 3 bachelor degrees, 3 master's degrees, a PhD, a couple of graduate diplomas, and I did a lot of those quals after I did my PhD. And it's because I believe in that continual learning. I write a lot, I write every day, I read a lot, I read every day, and maybe that's a way to medicate imposter syndrome, because you know, if any, and often they are blokes, my apologies to all the blokes out there, invariably if a bloke goes, well, who the hell do you think you are? It's like, well, look at the quals, love. Or if someone goes, well, I don't think you know about that, it's like, dude, I have 20 times your publications. Go write something and come back and have a chat, right? So
I can attest to that.
So, but do you think, Shay, it's about, start to get the runs on the board, Shay, in lots of different areas. So start to actually codify your achievements and sit in them with happiness and comfort.
What does imposter mean? I think imposter might mean that you're not convinced within yourself that you know what you're talking about.
Wow.
And you're worried that somebody else will recognise that.
So that's actually about you, it's not about other people.
Absolutely, yeah. But you externalise it, you project it onto others, and you wait for others to tell you you're inadequate because you don't have the capacity to say, I feel inadequate, I better do something about it.
Shay, I would come up with a teaching, a learning, a research, a community service, a life plan, with every year giving yourself increments of achievement. Small, like I'm going to do an hour, LinkedIn learning session. Give yourself lots of micro achievements that you can build a career on. And Shay, that might make a real difference, I think. So you can start to trust yourself and believe in yourself that you're doing well. Good on you, Shay.
Yeah.
And get in touch with us. Tell us more things about you. This is exciting.
Yeah. I hope Shay is non-binary.
So do I.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
All right. So next question is from Susanna. Hi, Susanna. Are there distinct states in the process of completing a PhD?
Wow. Well, Suze, of course, is one of the greatest PhD supervisors in this country, nay, the world. And you can tell the calibre of her supervision by the quality.
I wish she was here to answer this question.
So do I. I'm going to have a go, and Suze, I'll interview you and you can give a better answer. Are there distinct stages or states? Absolutely, that they are. This could be a future whole course. The first thing I'd say is, in supervision, we talk about a supervisor. A supervisor with a single student is not a single supervisor. There are about 8 different supervisory moments and attributes and characteristics. A supervisor has to become different things through the different process. So the supervisor you need at the start to give you confidence, get a vibe, get a research design in place, that's a different supervisor than the poor person at the end who's doing that final draft, okay? They're different from the person at 3 a.m. in the morning checking the data set. These are different supervisors, okay? So that's the first thing.
As a supervisor, I wish students understood that more.
And of course, this is why rescue supervisions happen, because a supervisor can do the nice, early, pleasant stuff, but when push comes to shove in the final year, can't cut it, right? And that's where you start to see the rescue supervisions happen, because the supervisors have been able to move through 2 or 3 roles, but not 8. right? So are there distinct states or processes in the completion? There absolutely are. So that's the supervisor perspective. Let's do the student's perspective. In many ways, I can tell the success of a student project by the 3 months before they started. So the student, have they checked that they've got information literacy skills? Have they met librarians? Have they got all their academic literacies in place? Are they thinking about academic writing? So the 3 months before, they get their ducks in a row, they get their life in a row, they talk to their partner, they talk to the kids, they talk to their parents, they deal with their laundry. They get their life in order 3 months before they even start. They know what they don't know and they know how to find it. Right, bang, we start. Then the crucial thing is the first 3 to 6 months. Everything. Research design. Everything. I can tell the quality of a thesis by the research design. And that's not only the nice methodological, ontological, epistemological stuff. It is, as early as possible, cutting the legs off a thesis. So all theses start really, really big. The best theses are small. So the great students are able to, in that first 6 months, cut it down. Boom. Find the gap in knowledge, bang, thanks for playing. So that's the crucial stage. And if that goes wrong...
And there's the COC.
Yeah, that's right. And if you get that stage wrong, it is like the concrete at the base of the house. No matter what you build on top, you're stuffed, right?
Well, yeah. It's much more challenging. Absolutely.
He's classier than me. It's much more challenging. Right. So
okay, you're stuffed.
So it's much stuff. Okay. So then there's data collection, which is field work or doing the deep archival work. So that's just slog, right? So that's the next stage. Are you prepared to slog? Are you prepared to go in there, go hard? It's often really boring stuff. Are you prepared to be bored? Go
tedious.
Are you prepared to do that? And that's very different from the start. So are you prepared to do that? And that can go on for 6 months, that can go on for a year, that can go on indefinitely. So are you prepared to do that? And are you then prepared to bring in professional development through this period to enliven that experience, right? So that's the other stage of a PhD. Are you just doing your thesis in, out, shake it all about? Or are you actually becoming a scholar, intellectual, citizen, industry engaged person? Right, so that's important. Then we start to get to, there's really 2 more stages if I do this, in a really general way. The next stage is disappointment, which is of course a great Pet Shop Boys song. Disappointment. So in other words, you've done your data collection, you thought you were going to change the world, and it's a bit patchy. Or you thought, you're going to run these samples and it was going to be, and it's just not. So,
or you get perfectionists. You get perfectionists who go, it's just not perfect enough. And in fact, it's great data, but they go, it's not perfect, so it's crap.
That's right. So it's So the disappointment, and that's when the emotional component. That's the emotional stage of a PhD. So it's not what I hoped and dreamed. It's not the unicorn thesis, and if it can't be the unicorn thesis, it is nothing. And so getting that group organised is really challenging, and you've got to get them through that as quickly as possible, right?
Now I have to change the title from The Cure to Cancer.
Yeah, so I'm going to cure cancer. It's like, well, no, you're not. And that's challenging. Yeah. So managing that disappointment stage, that's when students leave. And that's when supervisors go, sort yourself out, and that's when rescue supervisions happen. And then the final stage is satanic hell. That's preparing it for examination. And there's just no way to pretty that up. It is hell. It is dreadful. It is, a lot of it's boring, but it's actually stressful, dreadful, difficult, worrying, complicated, stressful, filled with fear.
Yeah.
And then at the end you submit it, and then you're just terrified until the results come back. So that stage is managing terror, managing the unknown. So are you happy with that? And then of course there's excitement and frivolity when it comes back.
I use different adjectives and so forth to describe what my experience of students are in that. But so I tend to describe them in similar ways, but I sort of see students going into a survival mode. They really are Bear Grylls in disguise, right? They're ready to rip the head off the first thing that comes across their path. They need to finish it. They want to finish it. They can't see where that finish point is.
Yeah.
And it just tests your mettle and your grit, right? You've got to keep trudging towards the mountain to get the ring into the fire, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that I don't know how many more steps I've got to take, but I've got to get there.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that there are going to be times like that you're going to need to know how to handle that before you get there, rather than get there and then find the disappointment of this is not going the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's hell for everybody. The final
It is, yeah.
3 months, if you're lucky, but the final 6 months frequently, it is dreadful.
Yeah.
It's dreadful for everybody. So,
but a lot of the PD activities and a lot of the advice you get from people is there to try and minimise the pain.
Yeah. And make the pain go away as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I did the 10 drafts was to structure this dreadful time, to put a template or a cookie cutter over it so it doesn't just go on indefinitely. It's like, here it is, we're walking through fire, let's do it. Cool. Good on you, Suze. Brilliant question, mate.
Absolutely.
There's a whole book there, Suze, and you have to write it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so the next question is from Kathy.
Oh, hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. Here you go. How to assist carers and parents with information and their studies?
Right, so this is a challenging question. This is an important question. And this is going to be increasingly important in international higher education and higher degrees. The assumption that PhD students are 25 it is wrong, has been wrong for a very, very, very long time, and is now so wrong it's an embarrassment. So at Flinders University we have students between the ages of 22 and 93. Okay, and every particular sociological permutation you could think about we have enrolled at this university, okay? And the average age of students that start with us now, this year, is 40, average age. Right. So this means the group that we are all supervising probably has children and probably also has caring responsibilities for parents, right? So there's a lot of caring responsibilities for our students. Now there's a lot to say about that. Firstly, and we all know friends in our lives where this is a reality, if you've got to a point where the caring responsibilities are debilitating, so you've got someone with a terminal illness or something truly debilitating like that, it is important to ask the question, is this the moment to do a PhD, right? So that's the first thing. It's like, is my life already 12 lives? My bucket is full, I can't add a PhD to it. So the first thing you need to do is go, is there actually room for a doctorate? And if there's not, that's a good call. Things may change in a year, things change very quickly, but calling that early. The second thing is, find a supervisor who's been around a bit. Find a supervisor who is experienced, who's done a lot of training, and is not reliant on homology. So they did their PhD when they were 23, they teach all their students like they're 23, young men, no responsibilities, moving through life, having a beer on a Friday afternoon, free. You know, if that's their model, check who their students are. If that was their experience and they're their current students, that's not your supervisor. Ask your supervisor about their experience with students of diverse needs, with families and all the rest of it, and ask supervisors about their relationship with families, because as I always say, we supervise the entire family. So if you've got kids with caring needs, you've got parents with caring needs, we get to know those people, and that's great, okay? So that's the thing, find a supervisor. Supervision choice is everything in this. And finally, the final point is about you, and it's about you and time. Don't enter this program unless you are prepared to take something out of your life, okay? The bucket is full, you can't add a PhD. Talk with your family and find strategies to move some of your responsibilities to others for a 3-year period, because you need to cleave out, you need to craft out a period of time each day to do that doctorate. And the family can help you do that. And the family have to be on your side. The family have to want you to do this PhD or it's not going to get done. So a PhD with caring responsibilities is a completely different PhD from a 23-year-old young man, and you need to be honest with yourself and look in the mirror. You need to be honest with your family, pick a good supervisor, and really make sure there is enough time in your day through a recalibration to make it work.
So in my PhD, and I'm doing the homological thing, those circumstances changed halfway through my PhD. So the start of my PhD was a completely different experience than the last half. For that reason, there was a change in my caring responsibilities, etc.
And you can say that. Say it.
Yeah.
Say what it was.
Oh well, my son Jaden, hi Jaden, if you're watching, was born in the middle of my PhD, and that probably, realistically thinking about it in hindsight, changed the circumstances enough that if I'd known that at the start, it might have been enough to say the bucket's too full. So there you go.
And 3 years is a long time. The only other example I'll use is the wonderful Stanley. Stanley started a PhD, and during his 3 years, he got married and had 2 children.
Wow.
So you think you're a young man about town, and then stuff changes.
Okay. Our next question is from AJ. And AJ could be...
I know AJ.
I was going to say AJ could be anything. Could be male, female, non-binary identifying. Could be a artificial intelligent computer.
AJ is a wonderful, wonderful woman. Hello, AJ.
Hi, AJ. AJ's question is it selfish to want to do more than one PhD to satisfy one's passion for learning? And I've got to say, wow. What a question.
Look, doubling the doctorate, as I think we referred to it, so doing a second PhD is incredibly rare, and I mean incredibly rare. So in the entirety of our PhD group at Flinders, we only have 2 students who are doing a second doctorate, right? So it is rare, and there are many reasons why it's rare, and I'll try and be honest here, because obviously I only have 1. But as I said in answer to an earlier question, I did a PhD and then did a third. I did a third bachelor, a third master's degree, and 2 graduate diplomas after I did my PhD. So I kept learning, but I never felt the need to do another PhD because you've done one, thanks for playing, right? And I also did a research master's too. So I don't think anything's selfish. I'm not one of those people that goes, this is selfish, that's selfish. Do what you want to do, be what you want to be, yeah. So I don't think it's a matter of selfishness. It's a matter of motivation. So you have to ask yourself, AJ, and I mean, you had a great doctoral experience and it was a wonderful PhD, but you have to ask yourself, what do you want to do the second PhD for? Is it a relationship with a supervisor and guided ideas? Is that the vibe? Well, that's great. If it is you want to write another book, then AJ, sit on your clacker and write another book, mate. Right? You don't need it. You've got a PhD. You know what you're doing. You can do hundreds of projects. As I say, I've done a PhD. My 20th book is being written now, so I'm not reliant on an enrolment to produce these big research projects, right? So ask yourself why you're wanting to do it, your motivation, and if it is you want a colleague to work with on another project, I think that's a great motivation. I do. If it is you're underconfident, I think work on the underconfidence, work on
Absolutely.
that matter.
If you're underconfident with one PhD, you're going to still be underconfident with 2.
That's right. And the other thing, and sorry to be a bit ruthless on it too, but no one is too bothered about it either. So don't think it's for any external audience. So don't think people go, oh wow, 2 PhDs. People don't. They sort of go, oh right.
So I know a question that's coming where I'll add something and come back to this point.
Right.
But I was going to say, with Open Day looming,
yes,
and my Open Day approach to Open Day really, when I'm meeting students, prospective students for the first time, I actually ask them, what skills do you want to build? Right. So if you look at it as a skill building exercise, you have more degrees than anyone I know.
Yeah.
Per human.
But I did it for new content. I
was going to say that you know about
content.
the levels and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So when you've chosen to do a bachelor, or you've chosen to do a diploma, or you've chosen to do a LinkedIn learning module, you've done them because I assume you've done them because there are certain skills or certain knowledge or certain aspects of each of them at the level that they're at that you've deliberately, carefully chosen. I mean, you don't do anything without deliberating on it first. So I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah, so for me those other quals were about qualifications. So I had I was interested in developing the education suite. So I didn't want to be a person teaching in a university without teaching qualifications. Felt like a hypocrite. So I therefore developed the bachelor and went right the way through for the education suite. But also then I became very interested in online learning. This is a long time ago. And so I did a graduate diploma in internet studies. I did it to gain a structured movement through a new discipline. And then when I gained a lot of interest in city imaging and regional development, I did a graduate diploma in gastronomic tourism, the one that always freaks people out, because I was interested in regions.
Whoever named that had a lot of fun.
They did, but regions, rural development, and how we use food and tourism to build up regional development, and I enjoyed that very much. But I did those
especially
for
back in
content,
those days
for
when
knowledge.
cameras were much larger than they are today.
How long ago do you think this was? But so AJ, nothing selfish, right? Anything that enables the self to grow and change is a great thing. But make sure you're not using the second PhD as a blockage or way for you to not kick on independently in your own life. You rock, AJ. You're a wonderful person.
Thanks, AJ. Okay, next question is from Idalia.
Oh, I love it.
Hi, Idalia.
What a clever human being. Wow.
Okay, so this is an interesting question.
It is.
What is the reason to do a PhD from economics perspective?
Yeah.
Not speaking about personal motivation,
No.
but rather how does a doctorate fit in the global economy?
Right, Adalia, you are an amazing person. And look, I'm going to start with a personal story on this and then go out to the political economy and higher education studies, because this is what I look at, that's what I research. So I got a great job opportunity at the end of my honours to work for the ABC, for the public broadcaster in Australia. And I made a decision to do a research master's degree. Even though I had a pretty good job and a remarkable, probably quite fabulous career in front of me. And I remember doing this. I've never told you this story, Del, but I remember doing this. So I was at the University of Western Australia, and I went to the career, those career, remember those old-fashioned career things in universities where there'd be lots of brochures and pamphlets about different jobs?
I'm sure they still have.
Do they still? Do they?
Yeah.
Right, so I remember I went there. So look, I'm making a decision about my career. I'm going to go to the career office. And I remember opening a governmental report. And it showed the average salary for people with a bachelor degree, with an honours degree, and a master's and a PhD. And because I'm a pretty tough person, I was pretty impressed to see the scale of the money that someone with a master's degree was earning over someone with a bachelor degree with honours. And the PhD was about the same. It was a little bit more, but it was about the same as a research master's degree. But the jump between a bachelor degree and a master's degree, I thought, for a couple of years of my life, bit of coin, thanks for playing. So yes, I was personally motivated, and yes, all that stuff, and I was, and it was lovely. But I remember the decision was a much more judicious and careful economic decision, Adalia. It was master's degrees allow people to enter the graduate employment market and earn a higher salary. so that's what I did. So, but that was a long time ago. That was not. Went into that career office in 1991. So, what the data sets show, in fact, has increased. We now have what's called degree inflation. So what happened in the late 1990s is that there was the expansion of the higher education sector. More people got degrees, okay? So it meant that just under half of every generation went into university and got a degree, and further, universities like Flinders, my old university, Murdoch University, universities throughout the United Kingdom, Open University in the UK, people were returning to study in greater numbers as well. So it meant much of the society was much better educated. So there was degree inflation. So whereas in the old days, there'd be 15 people applying for a job, 2 of them had a degree, thanks very much, you'd have a great advantage. Now we've got 1,000 people applying for a job and 800 of them have a bachelor degree, right? So the first thing to say is, with degree inflation, if you've got more than a degree, that'll get you where a degree used to get you. Horrendous but true. So it is a way to leverage yourself into a competitive position to get a job. So if you've got the bachelor degree, which most people have, and one step above, thanks for playing. Now, and the data sets show that. So you will not only earn more, but in a labour surplus, you've got a better chance of getting a job. So they're the two things. But then let's talk particularly about the PhD from an economic perspective. Because let me tell you what else has happened in the last 25 years. Industry, so I'm talking about the private sector, also the public sector, has reduced their spend in research and development. Of course, this impacts directly on your fields, incredibly so. So 30 years ago, there used to be a whole series of tax situations whereby an industry, mining, automotive, pick anything, engineering, there would be a tax rebate for an R&D department, research and development, right? So that means that in-house people could be developing R&D. That's great. The tax system changed radically. Politics and government, privatisation and hyper-individuality and on we go have changed in the political economy in the last 25 years. So now R&D is being outsourced to universities to reduce the cost of it. So what happens now is industries, pick an industry, public, private sector, all industries, require the highly skilled people who are going to come into those industries to do a hell of a lot more. So 20, 30 years ago, you'd get a job and they would train you. You would arrive at the job and there would be training and you'd have peer support and mentoring and it would be magnificent. Now, labour surplus, you've got to hit the ground running and you've got to know how to run things beyond your comprehension. So the thing about a PhD is you've run the business, you've run research, you understand R&D, you've done research design, you understand data collection, you've had to front up and produce research in and of your own. So you have the ideal data set for the industries that are running at the moment that are lean as, and are desperate for R&D, desperate for ideas, and maybe not, no longer got the R&D department. All of us individuals are coming into industry as our own R&D department. So in terms of the PhD skill set for the current state of the private and public sector, where one person is having to do 57 different jobs, you are perfect for it and the pay is good. And unlike in the old days where the PhD, 20 years ago, where the PhD was rare, and if someone was hiring you, they'd be going, who do they think they are? They've got a PhD, they won't stay. They won't stay with us. Now, because the entire population is much better educated, there is, even if you've only done a coursework master's yourself, there is an understanding of what a PhD is. There is a respect for that, not a fear of it. It's like, that's a clever person, I respect clever people, that person has that skill set for us. So make sure, and at Flinders we have this, we have an industry-focused PhD. It's part of what we do. And we train the students to commodify is one word, translate is another. Translate the skills of the PhD into an industry pathway or gateway, right? So it's often called, transferable skills and stuff, but it's being able to use the language of industry on industry's terms and codify the great skill set you've had. Now, have I answered Dahlia's question?
So I'm sitting here thinking about again, what I was saying about skills.
Yeah.
Because when you go for a job, that's what you're actually doing, right? You're trying to sell your skill set to the employer.
That's right.
And
That's right.
the PhD is the ultimate in terms of building that flexibility. And the flexibility, the ability to communicate across disciplinary boundaries, being socio-politically aware and being able to contextualize and adapt is the thing that it's one of those underpinning skills that industry or employers in general care about, but has not really been a focus until recent times.
Yeah.
And that's now one of the biggest messages we're getting. So I think that's a great reason to do a PhD from your own economic perspective.
Oh yeah, you're rendering yourself competitive.
That's right.
In really difficult economic times.
Yeah.
And can I just say, I'll just put in the final COVID point too, that obviously in difficult times, neither pandemic, but in difficult times, people return to education. Because, as my old mother always used to say, the time is going anyway. So if the time is going anyway, you're underemployed or unemployed, and you're sitting at home watching daytime television, enroll in a PhD and do it. Use the time, so when we're out of this economic debacle that we're in at the moment, you're ready to rumble.
So I don't know if I have a statistically significant sample set, but I am impressed with the number of mature age students that I'm seeing now. And the reason I say that is a couple of reasons, but the main one is that mature age students come back to university knowing, and they have imposter syndrome more than most people actually.
Interesting.
They're frightened of, I knew stuff a while ago, I don't really know it now, and they have no confidence, right? But they come with their head firmly screwed on. They know what they're doing, they know why they're doing it, and they end up being highly successful.
Oh my Lord.
Simply because of that fact alone.
Yeah, we've got our excellence, our PhD Excellence Awards, the best theses on the campus we're giving out in a couple of weeks as part of Docfest actually, and of the 12, I think 6 are over the age of 40 and 2 that I know of are over the age of 60.
Also, I think a lot of people, when they do a PhD, they end up getting a job in some area based on a skill that they developed during their PhD that they weren't actually expecting to develop when they started the PhD. And I can give you a lot of examples of that. I have a friend who did his PhD just after me, and because of the nature of his project, he ended up having to do simulations on a Unix workstation, and he became such a proficient super user of Unix, he actually worked in a corporation running their Unix system and was paid handsomely for it. Wasn't what he intended to do when he started the PhD, but that was a serendipitous outcome for him.
Extraordinary. And I think students underestimate the skills they gain on the way through.
Yeah.
Huge. I hope that answers the question. But
I hope so.
Great question. Great. And it's changing daily.
All right. Our next question is from Lise.
Hi, Lise.
Hi, Lise. How you doing? In the real world, does it matter professionally or academically if you attain your doctorate through one of the top 8 or not? I'm hoping that if you have your doctorate, it counts equally among others of its kind, irrespective of the institution. And this is the question I've been waiting for.
Look, it's a thing. Okay. And again, look, it's rare for me, but I'll start with the personal on this and then go out to specific, bespoke disciplines. And remind me, I might throw in some RAE, REF data sets on it as well. Okay. So I did my Bachelor of Arts with first class honours and my research master's degree at the University of Western Australia, which is the group of 8. So for our colleagues around the world, so the equivalent of the Ivy League or the Russell Group, right? Okay, so I did the stuff there. Those degrees were very basic, no innovative knowledge there really at all, highly traditional, highly conservative. The supervision I received in the research masters was poor, nay, invisible. I had no context to do innovative work at all. Bit of a shambles really, so it was a force of one. I did that on my own, and it was an incredibly traditional, backward experience, and I was fighting the system all the way through. When I came to do the PhD, which was straight after the Masters. I was one of the youngies that went all the way through. I moved to what was often called sort of the 60s groovy university, so Murdoch University, like in the UK, Keele for our colleagues in the United Kingdom. So that group that were created in the 60s, groovy, edgy, interdisciplinary. And I chose to go there because the field I was moving into, from a traditional history degree to cultural studies, the discipline was there. And further, I was fortunate at that time. Murdoch University was in the 3 most important cultural studies places in the world. Now, if you think about Australia at the moment, I can't think of any area really, except probably groundwater, where we're in the top 2 or 3 in the world, to be frank, right? But in cultural studies we were. We've lost that now for multiple reasons involving governmental disrespect of the humanities and the social sciences, but I will not divert down that rabbit hole. So I made that decision to go to a university that was and is known for that discipline. The Group of 8, the Russell Group, the Ivy League, they're not known for these innovative, edgy areas. I think about the really edgy, the really great disciplines on the planet at the moment. Post-digital studies, I think about deviant leisure, I think about ultra-realist criminology, the really edgy, magnificent areas of knowledge, the people that have got courage. Those disciplines are nowhere near the posh universities. And in fact, the RAE, the Research Assessment Exercise, and the REF in the United Kingdom, which was a lot like, can I say, the ARC here, went into the review of research to try and solidify money with the elite. So we're going to give research money, we'll pretend that we're going to disseminate it, but we'll invariably reward the people that we've already rewarded, right? Now what they actually showed, because it was peer reviewed for all disciplines, is that excellence didn't exist in the very few universities. They ended up having to call it, I always love this phrase, pockets of excellence. So it is dependent on the disciplines. Work out what your area of expertise is. Look at who is writing in those areas. Simple as that. Who are the great names in your discipline? Now they may be at Harvard, they may be at Cambridge, but I think about all the disciplines I work in, all of them, there's lots of them. Then there's nothing in my disciplines, nothing in the Group of 8, nothing in the Ivy League, nothing in the Russell Group, nothing. The edgy people are working in edgy institutions. So you have to make a decision, and it's a decision. Do you want to do a degree that's about the insignia on the parchment? Or do you want to do a degree for the people in the know, people in that knowledge system know that that institution is where the edgy, brilliant people are developing new knowledge, and those edgy, brilliant people will write references for you for the rest of your life, provide the gateways into the publications in the field, and on and on and on we go. So all I'd say is I have seen no relationship, none, between the posh universities and producing excellent knowledge. None. That's my series of disciplines. In Jamie's disciplines, it's more complicated because there's a lot of money that's required to make experimental science operate. So it is dough focused. And often the top end of town universities have the coin. In my fields, you don't need the coin. You don't need the coin. So it's simply about how clever are you? How brilliant are you? How hard do you work? And that creates the excellence. In your fields, it's a bit different. Do you want to just raise that?
Sure.
Did I answer it wrong?
No. You've just given me, my brain's gone on a bit of a circus to try and minimise the number of things I could talk about. So I'm going to say that my answer to the question from a science perspective is it used to be a thing, and it was such a strong thing that everybody tried to flock to the Group of 8. or overseas to Ivy League and Oxbridge. As time progresses, I think it's becoming less and less and less of a thing. And I'm sure that Tara's point about the money, the cost of research is definitely absolutely true. But I'd like to temper it with my comment before about skills and what skills do you want to have, because if you get stuck in the game where I'm going to go to one of the posh universities because it will give me a qualification, it might get you with your foot in the door of the opportunity you want to follow after that. But if you can't deliver, if you're not the real deal, the imposter syndrome is going to be even stronger. And the reason for that is because that's where I don't want to use the word popular, but that's where the better established areas are in the posh, expensive universities. And you have to be in the top 1% of the people who do things in those fields to have a career that's based in those areas. Whereas if you are edgy, if you are interested in things that are not in the mainstream, you develop a unique skill set, you're suddenly more interesting, more employable, and if you can transfer those skills, you actually have more opportunities. Now, that's a kind of a strange way of putting things, I think. And the reason I say that, actually, is because I know, I would say, hundreds of people with a PhD, and I only know one person who has 2 PhDs. And that person has a PhD from the University of Melbourne, which is where he did his PhD in chemistry. And then he did a second PhD at the University of Cambridge through Clare College. And he went to Cambridge to get that second PhD because he thought that was a strategy for using that reputational doorway to open doors for him. And I mean, this is Professor Robert Lamb, who is now the head of the synchrotron in Canada, the Canadian Light Source.
Oh, right.
And
this guy.
yeah, and he's very well known in Australia in chemistry. He was the inaugural director of the Australian synchrotron when it opened back in 2006. And he was one of my PhD examiners. And so, interestingly, Rob must be near retirement age now, and when he was a student, which would have been in the 70s, I think that Oxbridge doorway thing, that reputational thing, would have been a strong thing.
It was.
It would have been a good strategy for him, but the amount of time he invested in that, if, one could make the argument that the amount of time he invested in doing those 2 PhDs, if he had have focused on his research area and published in the time he spent on that second PhD, he might have actually developed a stronger research profile, which would have accelerated him in a different way. Yeah. So I don't know if there's a simple answer to that question in that sense, but I will tell you that when I left after I did my PhD, so I started out at UNSW, which was one of the group of 8, and I ended up finishing at Newcastle University, which was one of the next tier universities. And the imposter syndrome, I'll call it imposter syndrome because that was presented in earlier question from Shay. I went to the US to do my postdoc, and I was very lucky. I managed to score a postdoc with one of the gods of the field that I was working in. And so in terms of that reputational thing, it was as good as going to Oxford or Cambridge, because the professor that I could then say that I worked for had the reputation on the international scale, and that was at Rutgers University, which is not an Ivy League university, and that was Professor Ted Madian. Bless him, he's not with us anymore. But what I loved about it was he had 4 postdocs that worked for him at the time, and one of them was a Harvard graduate, a Harvard doctorate, and he treated us the same. Even though I looked at that Harvard doctorate and I looked at my doctorate and I thought, sure, right? But he was so gracious, he didn't care. And, he opened my eyes to a completely different perception of how things are valued and what people do. And in fact, it's what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's you're judged on your efforts and your achievements that you do. It doesn't matter where you have your PhD from.
This is about being intelligent. We forget we're in the clever business. It's about being clever, and cleverness. And as you get as old as I am, you know that cleverness and intelligence and brilliance exist everywhere. But what doesn't exist everywhere is innovation. Innovation exists in little pockets, in moments in time,